Look what arrived in the post the other day, all the way from Sweden. Cutting tools for the lathe. Anders sent them to me. Thank you very much, Anders. He has a workshop too and a YouTube channel to go with it, just like me. So I'm putting a link to his in the description. So do check it out. Well, in a bit. Not now, in a bit. Apparently, these days, most people use carbide cutting tools, which are basically disposable because you can't sharpen them. But I'd rather figure out how to use traditional tooling for my vintage lathe if I can. Now, there was already a ground cutting edge on the tools when they arrived, courtesy of Anders, but they wouldn't work in the tool holder that I have because my tool holder angles the tool upwards. So the facets, the ground facets in the end of the tool have to be at a different angle. So I'm slowly changing the angles and putting them back on the lathe to see what happens and learning about sharpening lathe tools as I go. And I treated myself to a diamond strop just to keep the edge really polished. Note my new link belt too. See that? It's made up of lots of separate links of something very tough. Each one is cleverly threaded through two others, and you can easily adjust the length of your belt by adding or removing links. Now, before someone tells me off for not using a traditional leather flat belt, let me just say I did try, okay? I went to the charity shop and I bought 3 narrow leather belts for €6. And I bought the joiners to go with them. But the problem was the leather was a bit thin, I think, and the teeth in the joiners maybe were a bit too close together because they cut into it too much. So although it did work, it didn't work for very long. Which is a bit of a shame really, and I could have spent money on some thicker leather belt and hoped that that would work over the small pulley, or spend the same amount on the linked belt, which was pretty much guaranteed to work. So that's what I did. And now my trousers don't fall down, and I have a smart new drive belt too, and it's pink, so all's good. Having the tool at a slopey angle to the metal means it's a bit fiddly setting the correct height. Basically, the more the tool sticks out, the higher it is. Unlike a horizontal tool holder. I guess that's why you don't see angled holders anymore, I guess. But it has to be at the right height or it won't work. I'm aiming for the center line, and that takes a little bit of tweaking. If it's too low, it could get snagged and actually snap the end off, and if it's too high, it could catch a little bit of metal between the blade and the workpiece, or it just won't cut at all. So, center line. Anyway, that was all before I could start on the job at hand, which is making new improved front axles for the wooden car, and of course learning how to use a metalworking lathe. I've been using 20mm threaded bar that runs through 20mm bearings for the axles, and that's worked really well, and it's incredibly easy because that bar is cheap and I can just use the nylon lock nuts to fit it to hold the wheel as tightly as I like. The trouble is the thread is now beginning to wear where it sits in the bearings. See that shiny part? But that's after about 500 kilometers, so it's lasted surprisingly well, but it will only get worse, of course, from now on. And I could just put a new length of threaded bar in, but I thought I'd improve things by machining new axles. So first, I turned down the length of the threaded bar till it fitted inside some thick-walled pipe. Well, actually, I turned it down too much. Of course I did. It's too easy to keep taking another little slice off the surface. Very satisfying. So I had to start again and stop in time this time. Then I took a piece of that same pipe and put it into the chuck and turned that down. My thinking is that if that pipe will go into the bearings, then it won't wear away because it fills the bearing up properly, and the threaded part can still stick out and hold the wheel on. The belt stretched for a while, that's why it came off just now, and I ended up taking 3 links out of it. Seems to be fine now though. So I turned it down until it was just about 20mm all along, and that was very satisfying. I know I'm not supposed to be making these long threads of swarf, but at least it's a sign that I got the cutting angles right, because it's cutting properly. And it's lovely to see these coming off. You can get these long streamers too when you turn wet wood with a very sharp gouge, and they look really cool. So they fly over like streamers over your shoulder. But the problem is long threads of steel wire, as this is, could catch something and pick it up and throw it around the room. So you're not really supposed to be doing this. You're supposed to add a breaking notch in the cutting tool itself, just behind the edge, which breaks up these little swarf things as they form. And I will do that. Well, at least I'll try and do that. But I'm still enjoying seeing them peel off like this. I had to move the saddle over because I only have about 2 inches of fine movement on the tool post. Anyway, the bearing slid on nicely. And the threaded part slid in nicely, and all would have been well, except I noticed this. Oh man, the hole in the pipe wasn't in the middle. Disaster! That would mean that the axle would have a bend in the middle, so the wheel would wobble. No good at all. And it must mean that the chuck has a fault in it, doesn't it? I have to think about how to fix that, if it's possible. In the meantime, I got around the problem by using just the tip of the chuck to hold the new length of pipe and a live centre in the tailstock. And I could have done that in the first place, I know that, but I thought, with such short pieces held tight in the chuck, that it would be all right. So much to learn. Eventually, after all this faffing about, I turned one that looks pretty good. So shiny, so straight, so smooth. And I drilled a small hole in it and welded the inside piece to the outside piece and put it into the steering block of my little green car. And it's true that the threaded part was in the chuck too, so that it isn't quite straight, I guess. And subsequently, the wheel has a small wobble, but it's really not bad. And I think it'll do for now. You're eating my plans. You are. And the next axle that I made went much faster and smoother without wobbles. So now I'm back on the road and I'm feeling like I'm beginning to get the hang of all this stuff. I like it. Sharpening those cutting tools really doesn't seem to be such a big deal. Well, so far anyway. And if I can just sort out that chuck and the automatic feeding system and the screw cutting mechanism, then I'd have a really useful tool, wouldn't I?